Anyway, so the recording's on now, and then finally, for me, this is my go-to airbrush. This is a Harder and Steinbeck airbrush, another large airbrush manufacturer, and this is, I guess, the Rolls Royce of airbrushing as far as Harder and Steinbeck are concerned. This particular one has a whole set of special coatings on it, in order that it can deal with the very corrosive paints and the like that we're going to put in the airbrush. So it's sort of an airbrush for life, if you like. It's well manufactured. It's gravity fed. It has a cup that will come off, and you can see here. This is really well coated, but I don't know if you can see inside. Can you see where already the materials that I've been putting in it are starting to take the surface of the chrome off? Can you see that? It's kind of gone like a yellowy color in the bottom. But I particularly like this one because when it comes to cleaning, it's very, very easy. And I can get my finger in with a bit of tissue paper and give it a good clean round. So I particularly like that. So this gravity feed airbrush, you can't remove the cup. So you get the little tiny cup, and it's not so easy to clean. So I mentioned about this one having a little wheel on the end, and I'll explain the purpose of that. We've got a dual action airbrush, so we press down for air, and effectively we press that down all the way. As soon as you want to airbrush, we press that down and we hold it. And then as we move the lever backwards, that introduces more and more paint. So the more pull it right back, you get the whole 9 yards. What this little thing on the end enables us to do is to effectively restrict that movement of the lever. So if you're doing something really fine and you maybe haven't got the dexterity yet to stop yourself overfeeding the paint, you can wind this little needle in, and to all intents and purposes, this little wheel, sorry, you can wind this in, and to all intents and purposes, you turn the airbrush into a single action airbrush, because you push it down, you pull it right back to the stop, and it just gives you the amount of paint that you've preset it to. And this one has something similar. It's just a little button on the end that you push in and release. So can't say I've ever used that. You know, I'm kind of okay with controlling how much paint I need, but it is another feature that you might consider. So they're the sort of airbrushes that are out there. Does anybody have any questions on anything I've said at this point?
I do have one dumb question.
Go for it, Pete. Go for it.
Yeah. So what I think you said that the up and down, which is the air, you would just push that all the way down. So you're not using that as a variable control. For
you're not.
No. Just an on-off.
No, it's just an on-off. Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't actually vary. If you put it halfway down, you wouldn't get half as much air.
Well, the movement is about 1 mil on this particular brush. So and it's what it is. It's a little valve with a spring inside. So when you press it down, it just lets the air in. There's no variation. So you press it down, and you want all the air. You don't vary the air with your finger, right?
Right.
Because the next thing I'm going to talk about is the compressor, and the compressor is where we would vary the air pressure that we're delivering to the airbrush.
Right. So you never have a need to dynamically vary the amount of air as you're spraying. It's a preset, really. You
can get these kind of things, and I've just taken this off my airbrush because it's leaking. But this is a quick release unit. So which is handy when you want to change airbrushes. So that just pops on there. I can pull that off and pop it onto another airbrush, right? So they're quite useful, and you can get them with a little valve inside. So and I think iWater also, in fact I know iWater also do an airbrush which has a valve built in, so you can actually control the air pressure at the airbrush rather than controlling it at the compressor. So you can either work with the compressor, or if you feel the need to dynamically change it without having to dig under the desk or wherever your compressor is, then you can get these little adapters with what they call a MAC valve on the side, or you can buy an airbrush with one on. But if I remember rightly, that's iWater's top of the range airbrush that has the little valve on, a couple of £100 worth. And I can't say I've ever needed to worry about it too much. Once Chris, I've got.
Is that what's on that one there?
This one?
No, on mine, if you look at
Oh, I can't see you. Just 1 minute. Let me just.
that.
Just 1 minute. Let me just.
Look at that, see if it's easier to see.
Yeah, looks like it might be. Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. I was totally confused at what that was for.
Yeah. So what you'll be able to do is when you've got the airbrush on, press and the compressor on, press the button on the top to let the air out, and then twiddle with the wheel, and you'll be able to hear the pressure going up and down.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And listening to what the airbrush is doing is probably one of the most important things, which will be quite interesting as I try an airbrush with a headset on, because I won't be able to hear it. But we'll worry about that in a bit. Right, let me just pin myself back up so I can see where I was. Won't be a moment. Right, there we go. So any other questions on what I've been through so far? Are we all okay? So we know what the types of airbrushes are, and really the big decision is the scale of what you want to cover to decide on the type of airbrush you might want. And like John says, maybe some what sort of dexterity you have as to what sort of lever you might want, and then paint capacity and needle size. So the next thing that I would recommend is take the airbrush to pieces, and this can be a little bit alarming for people when they've not been airbrushing before. But one of the very first things to do, in my view, is to get familiar with the parts of the airbrush, because you will be taking it to bits a lot. So bite the bullet, look at how it goes together, and get used to taking it apart, because after a spraying session, if you're not planning on doing anything maybe for a few weeks, then a good deep clean will be essential. Otherwise you're going to have trouble. So and cleanliness is very important with airbrushing, because the sort of tolerances we're talking about between the needle and the nozzle are very, very fine. So if you get any muck or old paint in there, then it's going to cause you all kinds of problems. So let's take this one to bits. This is the entry level one. They're all very similar. This one has a casing on the back that you unscrew. Then inside, you'll see that we've got a little knurled wheel there, and the needle here sticking out the back. If you unscrew the little knurled wheel, that releases the grip on the needle, and you can pull the needle out. Now, these are quite delicate, these things, and they're very sharp, and they do. I stuck one in my finger yesterday by mistake, and they do make you bleed. So be careful with them. One of the things you will see is you'll hear is some people say, never take the needle out the airbrush backwards. And the reason why they say that is that inside the body of the airbrush, you've got a series of seals. And those seals are effectively there to stop the paint, which is in the paint cup and the front of the airbrush here, is to stop the paint finding its way back along the needle and then into the mechanism that controls the air pressure in the paint. So if you ever get a situation where you're getting paint coming out of here, out the back, then you've got a serious problem, and the seals will need changing in the airbrush. Now it's all well and good saying don't take the needle out backwards. Some airbrushes you can't get them out forward anyway, and this is an example of that, not without sort of major deconstruction. The reason why they say don't pull it backwards is because any debris that's on the needle you could actually pull back into the seals at the back. But yeah, if you've got an airbrush where you can take the needle out forward, then I would recommend you do that. If not, then you've got to take it out backwards. So you've got a needle. Also on the back of this this unit here, just ahead of the little knurled wheel, there's another knurled wheel. And if you unscrew that, and it'll be screwed in quite a way, you can see they're all very similar. I'll take the other one to bits in a minute so you can see the difference. And then this piece comes out. Okay, so and you'll see it's got normally they'll have something like this, a little sort of pivoting thing on the end, and you can see that sits in the hole. Hang on a second. That sits behind the lever. Okay, and this has got a spring on it. So that's the spring effect that you get when you pull the lever back. So obviously the tighter you screw this in, the stiffer the action of the airbrush. And I would suggest that you screw it in far enough so that it gives you the action you want, but not so much that it gives you sort of finger fatigue. So that's that piece. Nothing can fall off that. It's pretty straightforward. Then you get the button itself. Okay, so worth remembering which way round the little grooves are. Just bear with me 1 second, just while I turn my heater up. My hands are getting cold. That's it. Worth bearing in mind where the grooves are, and normally the grooves would face the front of the airbrush so that it creates an area of friction for your finger. So when all that does is it sits inside the top of the casing and presses a little button which is inside there, and that's the button that releases the air. Okay, so that's pretty much the back end of the airbrush. On the front end, you've got the cap. So this one's called a crown cap. Let's see if you can you see that it's got like a little, it's like castellated, like a little crown. You see that, John?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. And you'll find some of them. I've got one here, I think. In fact, this is Bill's airbrush. It's another Sim 35. You can see this one has just a straight cap on it, right? There's no castellations around that. And the reason why you might use a crown cap is that when you're very close to the surface, you're doing some real detailed work, and the air hitting the model can bounce back and create turbulence inside the cap, and therefore affect the spray pattern. So the reason why it has these little bits cut out is to allow the air to dissipate, to get rid of the turbulence. That's why if you get two caps with your airbrush, and these Sim 35s do have, then that's the reason why. So if you get in trouble with the paint going all over when you're very close, change the straight cap to the crown cap. Okay. The next piece is kind of the nozzle holder. Again, you just unscrew it. Now, these things have seals on, this particular piece. So it's very important that when you put them back together, that they're nice and tight. Finger tight, but nice and tight. And I'll show you what happens if you don't get them tight. So it's just a casing effectively on this particular airbrush that unscrews. And then the next thing you get, and this is where you start to see the difference between the sort of the entry-level airbrushes and the more expensive ones, is that this airbrush, in order to take it any further, now requires a tool to take any further bits to pieces. This little tiny pointy thing here, this is the nozzle set, and the needle, I won't put it in, but it basically pokes out through the hole in the end of the nozzle. Now, to change the nozzle, you need a little spanner. So you get one of these little spanners with your airbrush, and you can just unscrew it. And this is very small. Okay, so you can see, I think on there, you can maybe just see it there. It's very, very tiny. So that's the nozzle, and the nozzle and the needle are a paired set. Okay, so when you buy a needle, it will come with a nozzle. Yeah, so, and it's very important that you keep them paired, because if you try and put a 0.4 needle into a 0.2 nozzle, then clearly you're going to have all kinds of trouble. So if you do have more than one needle, take care not to mix them up. So that, to all intents and purposes, is all the bits of an airbrush. You can go further. Inside, depending on the model, there's you can unscrew further items where the seals sit, and so, but I'm not at this point going to even attempt to do that. But should you need to, then you can get inside and you can actually take these parts out. But this is as far as you want to go when you're just doing normal airbrushing. So I'm just going to put that back together. Not got my glasses on, so amazes me how they can actually make these things this small. They clearly can. So I'll just nip that up.
Humanly, you have to be a little careful with cross threading and stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, take care, and don't, let's not be cranking it round because it would just snap. It's very, very delicate, but yeah, it's rare that, I mean, when you're doing a deep clean, you would take that off and you would put that nozzle into some kind of liquid reamer or something like that to clean it if you needed to. So I'll put it back together. So I'll put this piece on first just to protect the nozzle. So that's like the nozzle guard, if you like. Make sure that's done up tight. Then the crown cap. Then I'm going to put the button in. Put it in the right way around. You know you've got it in the right place because you can feel the spring from the little valve underneath. And I'm going to put this piece back in with this little lever that sits behind the lever. Just pop that in. There we go. And I'm going to do this particular one. You have to screw it in quite a way because the thread that you're screwing it into is the same thread for the back. And I was trying to do this yesterday, and I'm looking at it thinking, why can't I screw that up all the way? Why won't it go in? And it's because I hadn't screwed this in far enough. So I'll screw that in quite a way. And you can see the action of the airbrush there. As I pull the lever back, you can see the body, see the middle piece moving backwards and forwards at the end. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So I've put that piece in, and now I'm going to put the needle in. So you need to be careful with this. And if you bend the end of the needle, that's pretty much good night Vienna for the needle. There are some tools out there that would suggest that you can you can re-hone them. I'm not sure how successful that would be, but probably just take a little bit of care and then you won't bend the needle. So pop the needle in, and it's tapered inside, so it helps you find the center, and you'll feel it hit the seals. It starts to get a little bit harder. Push it in gently. This is. I'm just going to take the crown cap off so I can see, and eventually then you won't be able to see this needle, I'm sure, sticking out the end, but eventually the needle will appear at the pointy end, and you'll feel it hit the stop. Now, it's really important that you don't ram this in really, really hard, because if you do, it will split the nozzle. So push it in so that you can feel it's up against the stop, and then tighten the little wheel up. And as you can see, as I pull the lever back on the airbrush, it's actually moving the needle back from the nozzle. Okay, I'll just put the crown cap back on. I sometimes airbrush without a cap on at all, and I'll explain why I would do that in due course. And then I'll put the back on. Nope. Get it on straight. There we go. And that's pretty much how you take it to bits and the components. Get used to it, taking it to bits. It can be a bit alarming at first, but once you get the hang of it, then it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to bother taking this one to bits because they're all pretty much the same. You'll notice this one has quite an unusual looking cap on the front, and it's what I would call a pinch cap. And what that means is that when you're airbrushing, you can actually get a buildup of paint on the needle. And you get that for a number of reasons. But what you can do with this particular cap is you can get a bit of tissue paper and you can just squeeze it like that, and it wipes the needle for you. So that can be really, really handy, which is why I particularly like that one. So any questions on dismantling and reconstruction? As Haynes would,
nothing on the chat. So
great stuff. As Haynes would say, replacement is the reverse of removal. So, but yeah, get into the habit of taking it to bits and get comfortable with it. Okay.
Are we
So
thinking coffee break?
I was going to do coffee at 10, John, if that's all right.
Okay, fine.
Is that all right with everybody? I'm probably going to do an hour. So what else do we need? We've got an airbrush. You need a compressor. You've probably seen that you can buy tins of compressed air, and and you can connect your airbrush to the top of a tin of compressed air, and it does kind of work, but it's quite limited in terms of being able to control the amount of air that comes out. And not only that, they are susceptible to freezing as the air comes out. So years and years ago, I had one of these Badger airbrushes, single action, with a little hose and a tin of compressed air. It kind of did the job, but not really recommended. You want to be looking at a compressor. So what I'm going to do, I'll just grab this compressor from down here. So this is an iWater compressor. You'll need a hose as well to connect the airbrush to the compressor. So really three types. This is an oilless.
Can't see it all, Chris, because
there's not really a lot to see, John, to be honest.
Okay.
It's
Just letting you know.
yeah, they're all very similar. This one's a little bit novel because the handle is actually an air tank. Normally you'd see it sort of an air tank, which is like a big cylinder, but this particular one, the handle is the air tank, and I have it simply by default because one of my old compressor got damaged in a flood, and when the insurance company replaced it, they replaced it with this one. So what do we know about compressors? There's two major types of compressors: oilless compressors and then oiled compressors. So if you look at the big compressor that you maybe have in your woodworking shop or whatever, they actually use oil. They've got an oil tank like an engine, and as the cylinder goes up and down, it's lubricated with oil, which is great. And it's quite handy if you're using air-driven tools, because an amount of that oil will find its way through the airline and into the tools. So like my air nailer, for example, that little bit of lubricant that finds its way is quite useful. But when we're airbrushing, you don't want any oil. So if you are using an airbrush, a compressor, which is an oil-based, oil lubricated compressor, then you must make sure that before you connect it to your airbrush, you put on something called an oil trap. And this thing on the end here, let's turn it around this way. It's quite a heavy thing. This thing on the end, I don't know if you can you see it, this thing?
Yeah.
This is a water trap, but it does a similar kind of job. But you would need an oil trap if you were using an oil-based compressor, and you also need a water trap, right? So, and they all come with water traps. And the reason why you have that is that there is water in the air, and as the compressor compresses that air and blows it out the hose, it blows water out with it too, only in very small amounts, but it does blow water out, and you don't want the water getting in your paint. So you would have this thing here is called a water trap. So this is an oil-free compressor, and most small compressors for airbrushing are oil-free. But I mention it just in case you're going to use a big compressor from your workshop. You can get compressors that don't have a tank, and they're probably the cheapest ones you can get. My first one was that. The downside to that compressor, not that I ever noticed it, as I was a beginner in those days, is that the air is not smooth. It comes out and it tends to pulse a little bit as the cylinder goes up and down in the compressor. The air sort of pulses on and off very slightly. And if you're doing something very, very delicate, then that could become a problem for you. What the tank does is the tank fills up with compressed air and gives you a very smooth delivery of air, so it's nice and consistent. Obviously, the bigger the tank, the longer the airbrush will operate without having to charge the tank. So when I switch this on, you'll hear it running, I think. Yeah, and then it stops. And it stopped because the air pressure inside the tank is now at the level that I set it to. And if I discharge the air from the airbrush, as soon as the tank starts to, as soon as the tank gets to a certain level, it will start to recharge the tank. Okay. So one other thing that we've got on here as well is we've got a dial. Let me try and turn this round. Hang on. That's what we want. So we've got a dial on here, like a twizzly knob, and we've got a pressure gauge. And the pressure gauge shows me the pressure that's being delivered to the airbrush at any point in time. And I can wind that pressure up and down just by twizzling this knob. And just for reference, most of these valves have a locking mechanism, so you can push the cap down and it will lock. And that became a real headache for me when I didn't know it did that. I couldn't understand why I couldn't turn it. So if you find that you can't turn the valve on your newly acquired compressor, it's because it's locked. See how it clips up and down? So I've got it locked now. I just leave it loose, but just be aware that they do lock, and if you can't twizzle it, that's because it's locked. So this is how we adjust the pressure of the air, and as I say, there's a little tank that gives us a nice smooth delivery of compressed air. Okay, any questions on compressors? Pretty straightforward stuff, isn't it?
A quick question, Chris.
Yeah.
What sort of pressure should you have it set to?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's the. Oh well, you need to spray at this pressure, or you need to spray at that pressure. Right. I'll cover that right now. In fact, I'll just swap cameras because we're not going to do anything on here for the minute. Just do that. So, oh, there we go. Right, so yeah, what pressure? You'll read loads of stuff about the pressure, and you must do it at this pressure, and you must do it at that pressure. And in actual fact, the pressure that you use is dependent on a number of things. It's dependent on the type of paint that you're using, and the viscosity of that paint, which we'll cover after tea break, and what effect you're trying to get. So you'll read books that say, oh, well, if you're using X type of paint, you need to spray at 20 psi. That's the pressure you want. Well, it's not. In my view, the pressure, we vary the pressure dependent on the environment in which we're operating. And I'll show you what happens if you have the pressure too high, and I'll show you what happens if you have the pressure too low. So I'll never be prescriptive around pressures. Because you can't be, and you know, it's even affected by the level of humidity around. So if I said, yes, if you're going to spray a lacquer paint, you need to be spraying at no more than 12 psi. Well, if you're in a really humid environment, then at 12 psi, you might struggle to get the lacquer to even come out the airbrush. So there is no answer. That's why I say that's the $1 million question, because you use a pressure that is that you like working with, you're comfortable with, and don't be told you must do it at a certain pressure.
I presume experience
yes,
teaches you about the best thing to do. It
does. Well, what I'll show you when we get into actually doing some airbrushing, which will be, I'm just going to cover paints, and then we'll start having a bit of a play with the airbrush. I'll show you the side effects of too much pressure or not enough pressure. Yeah, so and you do get to know, and I said about listening to your airbrush, so which is going to be quite difficult for me to do, but so can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a nice smooth sound, and it's consistent. If you've got paint in there that's a little bit too thick and you haven't got enough air, it won't be going like this. It'll be going spitting and coughing.
Okay.
And you'll be able to see it on the surface. Rather than get a very smooth application of paint, you'll see like little spots appearing, and it's just because the paint isn't atomizing enough. So it starts spitting and crackling, and so the sound of the airbrush can tell you a lot about how the airbrush is set up, and can give you some indication as to whether or not you need to thin your paint, or you maybe need to up your air pressure a little bit, or whatever. But experience, there's no substitute for experience, Alistair, to be honest.
So Chris, can I ask a question about that? So
yeah,
I assume, therefore, and maybe incorrectly, that if the different paints you're using might affect that. So like acrylic,
Yeah.
Visa enamels or Visa varnish, or so presumably you have to factor that in as well.
You do. Yeah, I'm going to cover paints after tea, and the various different characteristics of the paints, and how you need to get the paint to a certain consistency, and this again, people will give you advice. For me, do your own thing, and I'll explain that when I talk about paints. But when I get onto paints as well, I'll talk a little bit about how the airbrush actually works, what it's actually doing, and if you understand what it's actually doing and what you're trying to achieve with it, other than painting, then it will help you understand the way the airbrush behaves. So I'll cover that after tea break when we start talking about paints, if that's okay.
Okay.
So it's 5-2 now. I've nothing else to add. Let's just do a couple more bits actually on equipment, things that can be quite useful. Just change my camera. Just 1 second. Just while I've got 5 minutes, I'll just put you back on the tripod camera. So some useful things that you might want to add to your armory whilst you're airbrushing. This this is a vital item. Now, this might sound odd, but this is actually Bounty kitchen roll rather than just bog standard kitchen roll. And the reason why I use this is because when you get paint and water on it, it doesn't fall apart. All right, so I always use that. And that's when we get into weathering at some point. I'll show you how I use this for some weathering techniques. And it's Bounty. It works really well.
Sounds like product placement to me.
It does, doesn't it? Yes, I needed to have a little PP sign. Use what you like, but that works really well. You may have seen these things. This is an airbrush pot. Really handy if you've got an airbrush full of something that you want to get rid of. It's a bit noxious. It has a little filter in the top, and you just shove your airbrush in and discharge your airbrush into it. So if you are airbrushing on the kitchen table and you want to dispose of some old paint, then they're quite useful. I also have this. This is rather a sophisticated device, basically a pot with tissue in, which I can fire the airbrush into when I'm cleaning. That's quite useful. These things are extremely useful. You'll have all seen these things, sort of self-gripping tweezers. So if you're spraying small parts, they're ideal. Cocktail sticks are good because you can put things on cocktail sticks, and then get a little bit of polystyrene foam, stick the cocktail stick in it, and the little part can be held until it's dry. These are useful. Pipettes, get them from eBay. I don't know, about £5 for 100 or something like that. Cheaper the better. What else have I got here that might be useful? I think that's probably it from an airbrushing.
Bracket for the air gun to rest on?
Oh yes, I've got just over here. You can probably just see I've got a little stand to pop my airbrush in, so you can. Yeah, that's quite useful. Thanks, John. Try and get the camera back to where it was. I think that's about it.
And you haven't talked about the extraction yet either.
I haven't covered the extractor yet. No, I'll do that next, Pete. These things are useful. Various different airbrush cleaning products, which I'll cover when we get onto cleaning. And then yes, extraction. So I've got this. This is called a bench vent. So this is sort of a fairly upmarket extractor. It vents out through the wall and takes away all the noxious fumes. If you don't have an extractor, then make sure you are in a well ventilated space, because the fumes that come off, even off acrylics, are not good for you. So if you don't have the luxury of an extractor, then I would suggest that you wear a face mask if you're doing a lot of spraying, and you can get face masks with interchangeable filters. Specifically, you want one that's suitable for paint vapor. It's not a dust mask will not help you when you're airbrushing. So yes, you could wear a mask as well if you want to. I find them quite uncomfortable. This works really, really well. You can get a small version. I think people like Eileen's Emporium, where I bought my first extractor from. I can't remember how much they are, but you can get various types. This is more of a bit more industrial, but it does a really, really good job.
Chris, I noticed that the one you've got there doesn't have any side or top hood to it, where a lot of the commercial ones seem to have.
Yes,
sort of
it does. Yeah, it does. Yes, and you can. It's just not on. You might be able to see on the top. There's some Velcro on here. Can you see?
Oh yeah.
So it's got Velcro, and it has a huge hood thing that goes on it, but that it's so intrusive that I don't bother, because I get enough airflow without having to put the hood on. Even the small ones, like you say, they have like a little plastic hood thing that you put around to help direct the air in. But this is quite powerful, so it takes everything away. In fact, if I just switch it on.
Does that have to be vented outside, or does it have sufficient filtering that it filters it all and you have
this one has to be vented outside?
Yeah.
Right, but you can see I've just put a piece of paper on there, and you can see that it's sucking pretty hard. So yeah, I don't have any trouble with anything coming back at me when I'm airbrushing with this particular one. You can get some extractors that have like carbon filters in, Pete. So sorry about this, just trying to get this back where it was. That's about it. Which do sort of filter out the noxious fumes if you don't have a means to vent outside. But this was just convenient for me because I can vent it straight through the wall and outside. Any other questions? No? Good. Anything in the chat, John?
No, nothing that I would have told you.
Yeah, no problem.
We've got Les, who joined us while you were talking.
All right. Hi, Les. How you doing?
He's muted.
Hi guys. Sorry I'm late. I overslept. No, hasn't happened for months.
Oh, I'm sure it's the first time in 21.
Oh, I wouldn't say that exactly, but no. Anyway, thanks for welcoming me aboard.
You're more than welcome. So we're just going to break for a cuppa now, and then when we get back, we'll talk a bit about paint, and then we'll start doing some spraying, and if that's okay with everybody, let me just try and pause the recording.
I missed the very beginning, Chris. What's the? You're doing some more on the scale scenes thing at some stage, are you?
Yes, I've not heard from John, so yeah. So I was hoping he was going to join us this morning, but he's not responded. So I've got a couple of options really. I can put everybody's name into a hat and get Tracy or Charlotte to pick the name out, or I can wait for John. Really, I'm just be down to you guys really how you'd like me to play it.
Yeah, he might join us on a future one. Might do it then, mightn't you? Might be nice.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
I quite like the idea of I'm happy to pick out the winning token.
Yes. Yeah. You just call a name out at random, John.
Yeah. Oh, John.
Yeah. That sounds like a plan. Okay. Right. I'm going to go and grab a cuppa, and I'll see you back. Shall we say 1:15? It's just. Yeah, it's about 4 minutes past now, isn't it? So about 1:15.
Okay, okay.
See you in a bit. Let's have a quick look. You had a square up, Cole.
Oh, I've got about an A4 sheet size of area I can work in now. So
yeah, gonna say.
Not too bad.
Yeah. Is everybody back with us?
Yeah, I think so. A couple have got no video on, but
Steve's got an empty. There's a couple of people, 3 people.
Nigel's not back with us yet.
Yeah.
Tim's not back.
Okay, we'll just give him.
Steve's on the floor.
Yeah.
There's Nigel. Oh.
What time is it in Australia?
Well, I was looking last night. I was exchanging some emails with a guy in Oz last night, and it was 10 hours, 10 hours ahead of us. He was in Queensland.
Depends which coast you're on. It varies by 2 hours across the country.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Tim.
Hi.
Right. So let's crack on then. Let's talk a bit. Any questions? Anything come to mind that you need to ask from before, or shall I just dive into paints? Great. Okay. Let's just have a look what we got up here. So lots and lots of different paints that we can play around with. Just get a small sample. Then we'll quickly whiz through some of the differences. Right, let me just pin this up so I can see what I'm showing you a bit better.
Hi, Chris. Just to say, although my video will be off and I'll be muted, I'll still be watching and listening as I'm doing some Care for David multitasking here at the moment.
No worries, Pete. Thanks for letting me know. I won't abuse you then if I know you're still listening.
I'm sure it wouldn't stop you.
Well, actually, no, it wouldn't, would it normally? No, no problem. So let's just get a few different ones. There we go. Right. Okay. So when it comes to paint, we have a myriad of choices, and it seems a bit like fashion paints from what I can see. Years ago, everybody used enamels. So you'll be familiar with these little tinlets, Humbrol enamels. These happen to be Phoenix ones, but it's an enamel-based paint. And yeah, it was definitely the thing. Quite smelly, enamel paints, quite toxic. So yeah, you need to take care with those. And then acrylics came along, and these were kind of like the wonder paint that was developed. People like Tamiya do an acrylic paint. Vallejo, these are quite useful for beginners. Vallejo do two types. They do model air and they do model color. All right, so the relevance is that the model air is already thinned, suitable for airbrushing. So you can take model air paints and dump them straight into your color cup, and you can start spraying with them straight away, give or take. The model color ones, if you can still airbrush them, but they need to be thinned. But they're acrylics. Okay. Here's another enamel. These are metallic paints. And what you can do with these things, I mean, these are amazing, these paints. But they're again an enamel-based paint. And we probably look at a slightly different technique if we're spraying these. I don't know if you can tell by looking at that. It is extremely thin. It's just like water. You'll have come across Life Color. I've not picked a very good example there, but Life Color acrylics. The airbrush company sell Life Color. These are quite nice. This is what I started airbrushing with. They spray quite nicely. And then the final type that you'll see is lacquer-based paints. So this is Alclad. So Alclad make a number of different paints. They're all lacquer-based. This one happens to be burnt iron. So it's actually a metallic paint. You can probably see on the bottom of there, look, you can see it's all stuck to the bottom of the jar. These are beautiful to paint. You get a lovely finish. They're a little bit unforgiving. They're very, very thin. But all of these paints all have their advantages and disadvantages. So these acrylics, the Tamiya acrylics, these are actually an alcohol-based acrylic. So you can thin them with water, and you will hear people talking about thinning them with water. I don't use a water-based thinner. I'll show you what I use in a minute. Again, these Life Color acrylics, you can thin with water, or a predominantly water-based thinner. The lacquer paints, you don't need to thin them because they're thin already. The enamels you would thin with white spirit. You can buy very expensive thinner, which is effectively a bottle of white spirit. So you thin your enamels with white spirit. And the final paint that I'm just going to show you just out of interest is this particular one. It's made by Mr. Hobby in China or Japan or somewhere in that neck of the woods. And these are buffable paints. I don't know if you've ever seen these, but you can put them on with a brush or you can airbrush them. But then once they're dry, you can polish them, and they look extremely metallic. So there's our choice of paints. So what would I use generally? I would use acrylic. It's not as smelly as enamel, and I don't find it quite so messy. The enamels I find give you a fantastic finish, but they're harder to clean up, the airbrush. Yeah, so my go-to paint normally is an acrylic paint if I can find one that suits my purposes. If I'm going for a high gloss finish, then I would probably go to an enamel, because they give you a very, very nice finish. If I'm doing metallics, then it would either be a lacquer-based metallic or a enamel-based metallic, dependent on what it is I'm trying to do. Some other things to consider are fillers. Sorry, not fillers, primers. I use these kind of primers. Now, you will hear people say you don't need a primer, just use paint, and you can just use what you're doing with a primer is you're trying to create the best surface you can for the surface coat to go on. So a lot of model makers, they'll actually just use something like some kind of Tamiya type light grey paint as their primer. I particularly like these AK primers, and the reason why I like them is they've got micro filler in them, and they're self-leveling. So if you're trying to cover any minor imperfections, and when I say minor, I mean minor, then these will enable you to build up a level and a nice even surface before you put your top coat on. One thing I would say about airbrushing, which if you've obviously done a lot of painting by hand, you can hide a few sins on your model with the paint. You cannot hide anything with airbrushing. In fact, it goes on so thin that if you have something that's not quite right on the model, the airbrushing will actually accentuate it and make it stand out. So these primers work really nicely. As I say, they're self-leveling. They give me a lovely even surface on which I want to put the top coat.
What are those primers based on? Are they acrylic or?
I don't actually know, John. Let's see if it says. I do use a specific cleaner for these, so yeah, I would imagine they're an enamel base. They might even be polyurethane. Certainly the Vallejo do a polyurethane primer, which I used to use, and that again, beautiful finish. But the problem is that when you spray polyurethane, if you don't leave it for 2 or 3 days and then you try and sand it, rather than it sand smooth, it actually rolls off, sort of peels the paint off. So you have to leave it for a couple of days. And if you're doing a lot of work on a model, then you can't be waiting 2 or 3 days before you can sand it. One of the other reasons why I like to prime things is because primer will actually show you the imperfections. So it's not off a train. This is a fuel tank off a Harrier, but this is actually 2 pieces. So there's a seam runs right the way down here, and right the way down here, because it's in two parts. And as you can see, you can't see the seam is not visible at all. If there was any imperfection in that seam, the airbrushing would have highlighted it straight away. So if you're building plastic kits and you're airbrushing them, and you want to make sure that you've dealt with your seams before you start putting any kind of top coat on, then just stick a bit of primer on it. And if you really want it to stand out, spray a bit of black paint on it, because that will really, really make it show. So there's the different paints that we have. Some of them you can just chuck them straight in the airbrush. Some of them we need to we need to thin before we put them in the airbrush. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen and show you a picture, because I think it would maybe help when we talk about paint and viscosity of paint, how an airbrush actually works. So I'm just going to share this with you. Just bear with me. That's the one I want. So you should have a picture of an airbrush on your screen now. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
So you might think that the air actually blows the paint out the airbrush, and it doesn't. What happens is, can you see my cursor?
Yes, can.
Okay, so we've got the air coming into the airbrush via the little valve, so from the bottom here, and it operates through a chamber from the back of the airbrush all the way through to the tip, and at no point does it come into any contact with the paint inside the airbrush. Okay, and what happens is the air is whizzing along here, and it's coming out the side of the nozzle. So if you look at your airbrush, you'll see there's actually some little gaps around the side, and what that does is it creates this Venturi effect here. And if you get air rushing past something, it actually creates a bit of a vacuum. And here, what they've done is they've identified it as being below atmospheric pressure, because it's effectively sucking the paint out. And this happens to be a bottom feed airbrush, it doesn't really matter. But the effect of the air blowing past the end of the needle and the nozzle is sucking the paint out of the paint pot along the side of the needle, and then out the gap between the needle and the nozzle. Okay, so, and what happens at this point here is the paint atomizes with the air, and effectively you get these almost microscopic dots of paint coming out. And it's getting that mix that's really, really important, because if it doesn't atomize properly, then you're not going to get a nice experience with the airbrush. So that's basically how it works. It doesn't get blown out, it gets sucked out. And you remember me saying earlier about how delicate these parts are and how finely they're made. That's why cleaning things correctly is very, very important, because the tiniest of blocks, and then the airbrush will not perform the way you want it to perform. Okay. So I'll just get rid of that. So let's talk about thinning paint then. So lots of different thinners out there. I've actually got a recipe for homemade thinner, which I got from Genesis Models, which if anybody wants to make their own thinners, then let me know. It's very, very cheap, a very cheap way of making thinner, and if you're spraying acrylics, it's ideal for thinning acrylics. And you need a number of things in the recipe. You need some flow improver and some retarder, some IPA and water, and that's basically it. And you just mix it to the right, the right amounts, and hey presto, you get some very, very cheap thinner. What I do is I use this stuff. So this is a self-leveling thinner. It's made by, again, Mr. Hobby. It's not water-based. I'm not quite sure what it's actually made of. I think there's some alcohol in there. Certainly smells like there is. I particularly like this thinner because, as its name implies, it's a leveling thinner, and it makes the paint go extremely flat on the surface of whatever it is that you're applying it to, and it works very well with Tamiya paints. So that's my thinner of choice.
These thinners, Chris,
yeah,
are these thinners suitable for all paints, or I thought you had specific ones for enamel and so on?
Yes, when I'm thinning enamels, I'll use white spirit. And when I'm filling acrylics, then I use this one. Yeah. I mean, you could probably try this with enamels. I never have. I mean, if you want to, these are quite useful to get. These are little shot glasses. You can buy them. I don't know, 200 of them for like £2 or £3 from eBay. and these are handy for mixing paints in. You will see people demonstrating, and you'll see it in books where people mix the paint in a little cup like this, and then when they've mixed it, when they've thinned it or whatever, they'll then pour it into the airbrush. I can't be bothered to do that, and I actually thin the paint in the airbrush cup, which some people frown on, but I'll show you how I do it so it doesn't end up in a mess. Again, it's down to personal preference, but if I was mixing something new for the first time, so let's say I wanted to mix this this enamel with some thinner that I've not used before, I would definitely mix it in a pot first just to see what happens. Because if you get a reaction, you can end up with what it looks like bubble gum, and the last thing you want is your airbrush full of that. So if you're not sure what you're mixing, then mix it in a little pot first, just to make sure it doesn't react adversely. Now, the purpose of thinning is that, if you remember from the little picture, I want the liquid in the airbrush, I want it to atomize nicely as the air drags it out of the airbrush and carries it to the subject. So we need to get a certain viscosity. And if you were to put raw enamel straight into an airbrush, it would struggle to atomize, and it would spit and cough. In fact, it probably wouldn't even come out the nozzle because it's quite thick. And the way you could get around that, you could just wind the pressure right up and just force it out, but not a good technique. So what we try and do is we try and get the paint to a consistency that is kind of like milk, which sounds really easy, but it's with a bit of practice you'll get it. So what do I do? Let me just get my other bottle of thinners because I want this little one. So as I say, I mix the paint in the colour cup, and the most important thing if you're going to do this is that you must always put the thinner in first. Because what happens is when you put the paint in the colour cup, it actually runs down the bottom of the colour cup and then all the way to the nozzle and sits there waiting. If you put the paint in first and then you add the thinner and you mix it up, you can't get at the thick paint that's already at the nozzle, so it's bunged up before you've even started. So I always start with putting the thinner in so that I know the thinner is near the nozzle. So, and the way I do that is I use one of these little pipettes, and I'm just going to put a bit of, it's really weird trying to understand which way to move this,
Right.
so you guys can see it. So I'm just going to put a little bit of thinner in there. I don't know if you can you see that? It's just a little bit in the bottom.
Out, Chris.
Yeah, and I'm going to use. I will use this German grey. So another thing, really important: mix the paint really well. Don't do it half-heartedly. And you can get these little electric mixers and various other bits and pieces. But yeah, get it nicely mixed up. Right. I think this is German grey, believe it or not. So I'm going to use my little pipette and grab some paint, and I'm going to mix it with the thinners about 50-50, because I know that Tamiya paint needs to be about 50-50. So that's always my starting point. Now that I've put the paint in on top of the thinners, I'm going to get a little brush and I'm just going to give it a good swirl round inside the paint cup so that it's all nicely mixed. And let's just try and zoom you in a little bit. It might be better. Trying to get it so that you can actually see the paint in the bottom of the colour cup.
We can see it. I mean, you can't see it. We can see there's a reflection of
yeah. So what you can do is you can brush the paint up the side of the colour cup, and you can see it run back in. and you want it to be about as thick as milk. All right, so that looks about right to me.
Is that skimmed milk or full fat milk?
Yeah, you're probably relevant. Let's go for semi-skimmed, Pete. But yes. So we've got our paint, and the first thing we're going to paint, and I would suggest that you do this because this is good practice. We're going to get ourselves a bit of paper, and this is going to be our first subject matter. Let me just see if I can get this zoomed back out a little bit. Oops. Okay. There we go. So before we start attacking anything, whether it's a model or a bit of paper, if you remember that the first thing I did was I put the thinner in. So when I press the airbrush, the first thing that's going to come out is the thinner that's at the back at the nozzle end that hasn't mixed. So what I always do is I check what the flow of the airbrush looks like. So I'm just looking at my pressure. I've got my pressure at about 20 psi, something like that. So I'm going to press for air, and then I'm going to pull back for paint. Yeah, and can you see? Yes. So I'm just going to see what the flow's like, and the airbrush is working quite nicely. I'm happy with that. Okay, so I know my paint's coming out, and it seems quite nice. It's not spitting and coughing. It's just making a nice sound. So here come the variables when it comes to airbrushing. We've got this lever, this dual action lever. The more we pull it back, the more paint we get. We press it down fully, and that gives us the air. So if I pull the lever back a little bit on here, and I mean a little bit, yeah, I'm getting a little bit of paint. If I pull it back a lot, I get loads. Can you see that? See how it's all kind of gone like spidery? They call that spidering. That's where I've got too much paint going down. Okay, but the more I pull it back, the more paint I get. So that's your first variable. The next variable you have is how close you are to the work. So if I'm sort of this distance, I don't know, 3 inches, you get kind of a gray effect. If I'm this close, can you see you get a difference in the pattern as the cone of the airbrush goes out? Now, this is really, really useful because if we're weathering, then we don't want, this kind of effect. We want this kind of effect. Yeah, so we can lightly dust the weathering across the model. So the distance that we hold the airbrush from the model is crucial to the effect that we're going to have on the model itself. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So some exercises we can do, because this is where you have to practice and you have to get used to this kind of thing. The first thing we'll do is we'll just draw some lines, right? So we've got air. We pull back for paint, and it's quite faint at the moment. Then I'm going to slowly introduce more paint. Can you see that?
Yeah.
All right. So, and the distance that I held the airbrush was consistent. All I did was introduce more paint. If I go in really close, now this, I can do a very, very tiny line. Look at my hands shaking. Can you see it's quite speckly?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not as good as I'd like it. Going in that close, I would expect to be able to get a very, very fine line. So let me just get a tissue. There we go. Just give my needle a little bit of a clean. And let's try that again. I've got quite a big needle in here, so this is a 0.4 needle, so it's probably, but it's still a bit speckly. So that, for me, that would tell me that the paint's not atomizing quite as nicely as I'd want. So I'm just going to up the air pressure a little bit. There's two things you can do. You can up the air pressure a little bit. or you can thin the paint. But either way, you want it to atomize in a way where it's not speckly. That's a little bit better. Probably needs a little bit more thinner in it. But can you see the difference between the two lines, where the first one was far more speckly and this one's a lot tighter? That's because the paint is atomizing better. Okay. So the next thing we'll do is we'll experiment. So practice drawing lines up and down, left and right. You should be able to get to a point where you can write. Okay, so I'll just get. So. Yep, something like that. So, excuse me. So practice doing your lines. Then another little practice thing you can do, and this will help you get the feel for where the paint is in relation to the lever. Is you can just do a series of dots. So we've got air on. I'm just going to pull the trigger back. See how. So can you see there what happened with that one? Let's try and zoom that in a bit. I'll just try and do that again. Can you see how that's got like a load of little spider's legs on the outside of it? That is a symptom of being in too close, too much paint. If I you see, I can draw quite nicely with this. It's not spidering at all, but if I introduce too much paint, then immediately you get this spider type effect. There's a good example. Yep, so if you're getting spidering, you're in too close or you've got too much pressure for the viscosity of your paint. Does all that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a balancing act. But yes, so the practice that we're going to do here is we're going to do a series of dots and we're going to do them at different heights so we can see what effect we get. Different amounts of paint. And you can see the variation that you get on the piece of work that you're doing. Okay. So, any questions so far?
Yeah, what's the ideal temperature you should be?
Temperature.
Yeah. Things don't run properly, apparently.
Yeah, you don't want to be when it's cold. It makes the paint thicker. So, just room temperature if you can. Obviously, if it's really hot, then everything's a lot thinner. But you can tell because the airbrush itself will behave in a certain way. If it's too cold, that means the paint's too thick. So you'll get. Let me show you. Let me try and simulate for you what thick paint looks like.
Presumably, if it's too cold, your fingers will be numb and you won't be able to work it anyway.
Well, that's the trouble. Yeah, you do get quite cold. So to simulate thick paint, I've put really low pressure on here. So, well, that. Can you see that? Oh no, I'm not in the right place. So this is the effect you get where you've either got not enough air pressure or your paint's too thick. Can you see?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, it's just spitting all over the place. It's not atomizing it, and it's one of two things. It's either, and it's all gummed up on the needle of the airbrush. It's one of two things. You've either got the paint too thick or you've not got enough air. So I'm just going to put my air back to 20 where it was, or just over.
Presumably, talking about room temperature, some of us have luxury places to do our modeling in, some of us don't. But I guess that the air compressor, because there's a certain amount of water vapor, you need to be careful about it freezing.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
If you left it in a shed out in the garden,
yeah,
it was a really cold night, that would freeze the water vapor.
It would.
Inside the
Yeah, you see, what you'll find is that you're on your compressor, it'll have a drain cock on it.
Yeah.
And you should drain it after every session, because it does collect water in the cylinder. There's obviously the water trap that I talked about previously, and that has a little button underneath which you can press and take the water out the water trap as well. So yes, don't leave your compressor in the shed full of water.
Yeah, your separators after the reservoir as well. So you should find on the bottom of your reservoir there should be because that will slowly collect water as well. So every now and again it's worth draining that as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Colin. Yeah, it's the tank itself, the reservoir, that's important, and the little water trap on the output of the compressor. You just got a little button underneath. You just press it. You don't get much water out of there, but I would suggest that if I was to open this drain cock on my compressor, there would be quite a bit of water in it. So it's really upset my airbrush now, because I've been running at such a low pressure. So it's gummed my nozzle up completely. My way of
Can I just add as well with the compressors?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the compressors, because most of the compressors you use for airbrushing, they are oilless compressors.
Yeah.
They are quite tight, therefore, on the mechanical tolerances. So therefore, if they are cold, the compressors, they will not work properly.
Yeah.
They really do need to be at a room temperature. That's what they are designed for. So if you are going out into the shed or the garage and then starting it up, your compressor will not last very long.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I thought of that.
What temperature? I mean, obviously they've got cooling fins, haven't they? What temperature? I mean, do they run? Can you put your hand on top of a compressor after a session? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
Or is it hotter than that? Yeah.
No, it's fairly. This one seems fairly cool at the moment, but so it's really misbehaving now, this airbrush, because it's got all the gum all stuck around it, and you can see it's misbehaving because when I'm pressing without pulling back for paint, I'm getting paint. Right, so what that means is that the needle is not seating properly against the nozzle. So without even pulling back, as soon as I press for air, I'm getting paint as well. So I'm just going to try and reseat.
Could you just run thinners on its own through the cup with that?
Well, you could, but it's got paint in at the moment. So
I'll tip the paint on the floor.
Yeah. I'm just. It's all the paint's running out because I took the needle out now. You see, there we go.
Incidentally, while you're fiddling about with that, Chris, Judy's asked whether you could give her the recipe, or give us, I guess, the recipe for your thinners.
Yeah, will do. Not a problem. I'll put it on my blog, on the website, and everybody will read it to see it. So.
And the other thing that's on the chat is that I think this is from Judy too, which she's saying obviously as you compress air, actually that will also increase the temperature slightly.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the UK, other than cold, we don't have too many major issues. I've certainly not had any problems with temperature, but I know guys in hot climates do tend to struggle a little bit. Yeah, so what I did there, because it was really unhappy because I'd been pumping paint through badly, I took the needle out, gave the needle a quick wipe, put it back in, I've reseated it, and now you can see that there's no paint coming out. I'm just getting air. So here we go. Okay, so another thing you can do is you can draw knots and crosses. In a minute, I'm actually going to spray something rather than a bit of paper.
Can you zoom out a bit, Chris? We can't see.
Yeah, can you not see that? Sorry, Judy. Yeah.
That's better, thanks.
You see, it's flowing really well now, the airbrush. You can just tell when it's doing its thing. It's Yeah, that's working really nicely. So practice dots, practice lines, practice doing circles, practice writing your name. Yeah, and practice and practice and practice, because it looks easy, but it's getting that feel for where your finger is in relation to the amount of paint that's being discharged. And you're far better off practicing on something like this than you are on a model, because if you get it wrong on your model, then it just takes a lot longer to repair the damage. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the extractor on. I doubt you can hear that, can you?
No.
No, that's good. That's good, right? So what I'm going to do now is...
You want me to make the noise for you?
No, yeah, that's working really well, John. Hang on, where's the mute button? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to... I don't even know what color this needs to be, but I'm just going to airbrush it in gray for now. And I'm just going to actually cover how do we lay the paint down onto our model. And again, there's a technique to this. So it's kind of primed. I did a bit of priming on it last night. So the first thing we want to do is we want to put a very, very light dusty coat onto the subject. And the logic behind that is that because it's light and dusty, the paint can adhere quite easily to the surface because there's lots of space for it. And it almost creates like a texture that the subsequent paint can get hold of. So light coat. So I've got my air pressure on. I'm just going to give a little bit of a light coat. So I'm not too close to it, because if I'm too close to it, then it's going to give me I'm going to get too much paint on it. So just a light dusty coat. Okay. What you can do then for speed, I mean, it's dry already, but you can actually use the airbrush as like a hairdryer, and you can just use air only, and you can basically waft it over the subject and it'll dry the paint. So now I've got my light dusty coat on, I'm actually going to start laying paint down a little bit thicker so I can come in a bit more heavy. And the trick here is keep moving, and when it's wet, hopefully you can see that it's wet, move on. That's the time that we want to move on, when it's wet. You don't want to be hanging around, because what you effectively will get is runs in the paint, which I'm not going to show you because it'll take me ages to get them back out again. But so I'm not going crazy, but can you see the wetness?
It's not particularly clear.
Is it not?
But yeah, I mean, you can
you see it shining there.
Light
yeah.
On, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you'll see it disappear as I've just put the air across it.
Yeah.
As it dries off.
Yeah.
So now I can go in really heavy. So I'm putting that down really, really heavy now. You can probably see it shining.
Yeah, we can.
And now I'm just cut back to air only. I can't hear the airbrush, so you wonder why I just sprayed it up my hand. It's just so that I could tell whether or not it was still going. You can probably see it drying. This is a flat paint that I'm using, so it should stop shining after a bit.
Yeah, we can see it drying.
Okay, yeah. So what I've got there is I've got some really nice coverage, and you obviously you go on to complete the whole thing, but yeah, you don't want to hang around too long in any one place, otherwise you're going to get puddles, and then you're going to get runs, and it's just not going to be pretty. That's probably about as heavy as I would want to go. Any more than that, and you're going to get runs. Just going to dry it off a bit.
That's a technique that you can't use with the single action.
Yes, you're right, Gordon. Yeah, absolutely. So if you were doing this with a single action airbrush, you would start by setting it so it was spraying sort of like this, very, very fine. And that's what you do your first coat. And then when that's dry, you would then wind up the level of paint and you'd come in a bit heavier like this. You can probably see that I've just got a little spot of paint on there. Can you see it just there? Look.
Yeah.
That's right. I've gone in really thick there. So I'm just drying it off. I'm not too close with the air, because if you've got too much paint on the surface and you go in to try and dry it, you'll blow it across the surface. Yeah. But it's slowly going now. It's not very warm in here, so that's why it's taking a while to dry.
Are you in and out building?
I'm in the barn, yeah.
Oh, right.
You've been in here, haven't you?
Many years ago.
Yeah.
I don't recognize it.
It's a bit different now,
Yeah.
but yeah. So
it's all plastered.
yeah, like me mostly. So there you go. That's how you build up your surface. Patience is really important. Don't try and do it all in one go. You know, just build the paint up slowly, light misty coat when we're starting.
I think that's the skill. That's the skill bit, actually. Well, certainly for me it is, because when I've ever tried to do airbrushing, I'm always too eager to get the color on.
Yeah.
You know, so I want to see that it's
green. I want to see the end result.
And I find that it's too green because it's got green ripples in it.
Yeah. Yes, it is about being patient, and then building the layers up. I mean, it doesn't take very long. I mean, if you're going at it sort of fairly, you know, you can get a lot done very, very quickly. Okay.
I see we've got a new member join us. Hello, David. No, he's not responding.
Is he not? I can't see because I can only see.
Pete just. Hello, David. Oh, he hasn't got his. Oh, hello, David. Happy New Year to you.
Hey, John.
No, he can't be off.
It's not like John Gowers. Okay, so there's not really a lot else I can tell you, I don't think. The practice is the most important thing, and get a model that you don't like, or an old one or something like that, and start spraying on that, and always keep an old model handy so that when you want to test a technique, then you've got something available to do it on.
So, Chris, you mentioned all the things that you are avoiding doing, like getting too much paint on and so on, splutters and all the rest of it. Should that occur, are there any ways of sort of redeeming the situation, or is it basically just strip the whole thing back to beginning with the thinners or something?
Right. Okay. So yeah, let's say you've painted your surface, and the airbrush is, I think my airbrush is out of paint. Yeah, and the airbrush spits a great big blob of paint out for some reason. Then what you can do is you can spray some really, really thinned paint over the top of it. Almost, I mean, you could go as far as neat thinners. And if you're using something like this Mr. Hobby type thinner, what it'll do is it will melt that blob of paint, and it'll help it level out.
Right.
So that's one sort of technique. When I'm doing a gloss coat, I'll start with my paint thinner mix at about 50-50, and I'll build the gloss coat up until I've got the cover that I want. So I've got an even cover across the surface of the model. And then what I'll do is I'll start to thin it even more, almost to the point ultimately where I've probably got 75-80% thinners and the rest paint. Because what happens then is that thinner that's going down on the top of the paint is leaving a very, very flat surface. It's effectively melting the surface of the paint. So if you really want to go for a high gloss finish, which isn't something that we do very much in railway modelling, but if you're doing like a model of a car, for example, then you want an absolute glass finish. So you just raise the level of thinner slowly as you get towards the finished layer. And as I say, probably about 80% thinners, low pressure, relatively low pressure, so it's not blowing around all over the place, and just lay it evenly across the model. And when it dries, you get a very, very smooth effect.
The other thing, I hope you don't mind me asking these questions.
No, go for it.
There's no other questions on the chat at the minute.
Yep.
So people talk about putting gloss varnish on. So you've painted your kit,
yep,
base colours.
Yeah.
So this is before we've weathered it, maybe, and you
yep,
want to put on some transfers.
Yep.
And people say that it's a good idea to have a gloss surface for the transfer to sit on.
It's
so
essential.
They use things like various varnishes in a can, which I'm not
yep,
sure about. But and then you then put a sealing coat on, do you? And then weather it. It's sort of the process really of going through the model. So you're starting off with your base model. You put your base
yep,
cuts on.
Yeah.
Now I want to put your transfers on.
Yeah.
Now you want to fix the transfers in place, and also weather
yeah,
weather and then fix. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Any sort of tricks about how you
absolutely, absolutely. So you put your primer on.
Yeah.
And you put your top coat on, and you've got a nice, a nice even. You can see how even that paint's gone on.
Yeah.
It's beautifully flat. But that's a matte paint, and a matte surface is quite. Tim's the expert on surfaces, but I'm sure he'll concur that, that a matte surface is very, very bumpy if you looked at it under a microscope. Yeah. And what you're going to do, and I'm going to do a session on decaling separately because there's a lot to it. But when you put a decal down, which is a very thin film, what you don't want is air trapped underneath it. And if you do get air trapped underneath it in all these little undulations, it as the light strikes that air, once it's dry, it goes silver. You get this silvering effect on it. So you want the surface you're going to put the decal on to be as flat, to be as smooth as you possibly can. And a gloss varnish, unlike a matte varnish, is very, very smooth. And so, yes, whenever I'm going to put a decal on something, I will always put a gloss coat of varnish on to make sure the surface is perfect for decaling. After I've put that on, then I can then go back in when I've done all the fancy stuff with the decaling solutions. I can then go back in and I can apply whatever varnish I want, which would be appropriate for the weathering that I want to do. So, and again, I'm going to do another piece on weathering if anybody would be interested in that. But when you're applying weathering, particularly if you're applying things like weathering powders, then powders will stick to a rough surface better than they'll stick to a smooth surface. So if you want it heavily weathered, then you want to be putting your powders on top of a matte varnish. If you want it sort of lightly weathered, then you want to stick it on top of a satin varnish. And if you hardly want any of the powder to stick, then you could put it on top of a gloss varnish. So again, the surface that you create impacts on the weathering effect you're going to get. In terms of varnishing in general, what I tend to do is when at each stage of the paint job, I would use a coat of varnish, and it would normally be a gloss. And I'll show you what that is in a second. I actually use floor polish. In fact, I'll go get it and show you. But I give it a coat of gloss, acrylic gloss varnish, just to seal in everything that I've done. It's a bit like the save button on a video game. You finish that layer. I'm happy with it. I'm where I need to be. I'll stick a coat of acrylic varnish over the top of it just to seal my work in and give me another new surface then to carry on. Same as when I've done decaling and whatever. But let me just go and get my varnish and show you what I use. That's not it. Where is it? There it is. So
questions come up on chat.
Yeah.
Do you put the gloss only local to the decal, or do you put it across
Excuse me,
a wider area?
Yeah, it depends really what you're doing. But yes, you could probably just do it locally to the decal. I mean, I would, when I'm decaling, I would use something like this. So this is floor cleaning product, and it's actually an acrylic varnish, and it's a very, very cheap way of buying an acrylic varnish. I can't remember what it was called years ago, but I remember when it first came out in the UK, and it's for putting on your wooden floors. You add it to your water, and then you mop it on, and effectively it's an acrylic varnish. You can use this neat
clear
out the bottle. It was called Clear. That was it. Yes. Now, unfortunately, they changed the recipe, so we ended up with this one, and you can't see it in that bottle, but this is what it looks like, which is far from clear. All right, so it's kind of okay, but this is the one to go for. So if you can get this, I got this from America. I think it cost me, I don't know, £9 or something, but it's the one with the wooden circle on the bottom, and you can airbrush that neat straight out the bottle, and it gives you a very, very nice gloss finish. So normally, if I'm doing something like a plane that's got loads of decals on, I'll just varnish the whole lot. But you could, if you were doing, maybe the side of a wagon that's got some decaling on, or maybe some numbers on the side of a loco, then you might just want to airbrush gloss locally on that. It's really up to you how you want to approach it. What I also do as well is, and I use this on the card models, is I use this. This is my go-to product for when I've finished my final coat to seal everything in, because this has got UV filters in it, so it stops, or it helps to stop the color of the card and the brickwork and stuff like that fading. That's a Winsor & Newton matte UV varnish, which is quite nice. You have to thin that. It's too thick to plump straight out the airbrush.
I'll ask a question, Chris.
Of course you can.
In that process we were talking about of, gloss then matte, then gloss then matte, and then everything with the decals and so on. If you're going to be putting decals on,
yeah,
why would you do a matte coat and then a gloss varnish? Why wouldn't you do a gloss finish to start with? Is that as good? Do your decaling and then do the matte varnish to end up with the finish you finally want?
Yeah, I mean, if you happen to have a gloss paint, which is the final color that you want, even though you want it to be a matte finish, then yeah, you could spray it initially with the gloss varnish, with the gloss paint, and that would give you a nice flat surface. But what you'll find in a lot of cases is the sort of colors that you're using, they're not available as glosses, so they only come in matte.
So the manufacturers haven't realised this, that actually people might want to go gloss so they can put the decals on.
Well, yeah, it's not really a thing, because you just stick some gloss varnish on it. To be honest,
I always have this paranoia that having achieved a really nice finish with the paint, I'm going to completely mess it up by putting the varnish on.
No, you're not. You're not. It's varnish is it's quite forgiving. So you can actually see there's this one here. It's a Vallejo Do It, a little acrylic varnish. You can use that. Put it on nice and thin, not too much air, not too much air pressure, and don't try and complete it. Don't flood it on. You just, when I was saying about when you're airbrushing, when it's wet, move on. Right? If you stay in the same place, you're going to get it running all over the place. So just build it up slowly, and you'll get a perfect finish. Then put your decals on, and then apply it after you've put your decals on. which is a bit of a science as well. But I'll take you through that when we do decaling. Then you can go in and you can put your matte varnish and whatever it is you want to put on from a weathering perspective.
I never remember. I know you're going to do decaling later, which is, but just as a point here, there's this stuff called microset and microsol. I can never remember which one does which, but one of them melts the decal, so it does take up rough surface.
Yes.
So if you for some reason wanted to do it on a matte surface, or hadn't put enough gloss on or something, which if you use one of those, well, first of all, which one would you use, and would that actually help the decal to actually take up into the matte surface?
Yes, it would, but you just wouldn't do that. Well, you could, but you're not going to get when you get a decal onto the surface right, it doesn't look like a decal. It looks like you painted it on. If you remember when I was showing you on that oh gosh, don't you hate it when your memory goes? That plane that I was showing us last week or whatever it was, 2 weeks ago. You want the decal to sink down onto the surface of the model, almost suck itself onto the surface. So don't make the mistake of not glossing it. If you do, you're just not going to get the same effect. It might be all right, it might not be, but you're going to make life difficult for yourself. So
I mean, I was sort of picking up on Pete's point really, where you've got to be careful you don't put too much gloss on. And I was just thinking that in my case I may not put enough on, and having not put enough on, or how do you know you've got enough on?
Well,
there's the danger of putting too much on. Do you see what I mean?
I don't think we're not brushing this on, so we're airbrushing it on. So no, there's no danger of putting too much on. You'd really have to go crazy if you're putting too much on. You don't want to flood it. You just want to, when I was painting this fuel tank, and it's starting to get wet, and then I was moving on. You just do the same with the gloss, and you can see it because when it dries, it's shiny. So you can hold it up in the light and turn it around. In fact, let me just cover cleaning first because I need to clean this airbrush, and then I'll just gloss that. I'll just gloss that fuel tank. Let me just change my camera.
Was it a typhoon or a tempest or something? The one you were trying to think of?
It was a typhoon, Pete. Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't think of it. Thanks very much. Right. Okay. So, a bit remiss of me, really. I've not cleaned this, and it's all dried inside, which is not ideal. So you can buy this kind of stuff, airbrush cleaner. I use this. Oh, are we zoomed? Hang on. Yeah, I use this particular one, Medelley airbrush cleaner, but you can get loads of different types. I just use this one because it's quite.
Particular cleaner depending on what kind of paint you've been using.
Yeah, you do. If you've been using lacquers, then this stuff just won't touch it. Okay, so I'd probably use some of this this leveling thinner to clear out lacquer. So, and similarly, if I've been using enamels, this stuff won't touch it. Yep. So you'd use white spirit. So preferably something that's similar to the base of the paint that you've been spraying. So given that I've been spraying using this leveling thinner, I'm just going to give this a bit of a wash out with some leveling thinner. So I put some in the colour cup. And then I get my paintbrush and I'm just basically washing the inside of the colour cup. Get the brush right down the bottom and just give it all a whiz up. So effectively I've got a really, really thinned paint in there now. And if I was to spray that, let me give me a bit of paper. You'll see it's, you can see it washing as I'm just running it around. Okay, so what you do is you could blow all of that through your airbrush because it's all nice and thin. But I've blown a little bit through. Or what I just do is I get my very expensive pot, tip the excess into the pot. That's why I've got the tissue in, and then get a tissue, shove it in the top of the airbrush, tip the airbrush upside down, give it a good, and you can see all pretty much the inside of the cup is clean now. It won't be clean inside, right? It's still dirty. So another quick, this is what I would call an intermediate clean. I'll stick a little bit more thinners in. And now what I'll do, just put my fan on. And this is where you could vent it into one of these. So you could stick it into the old pot and just spray the thinners through. But what I like to do is do it into my little pot, because then I can see what's coming out. So as you can see, as I'm spraying, can you see it's almost clear? It's just liquid, just almost clear. There's no gray left. So I'll keep doing that. Pump the airbrush, so really get as much through as you possibly can. And that's done. That's ready for some new color now. Okay. What you will see some people doing is they'll just close that up. I'll stick a bit of this ordinary airbrush cleaner in it now that I've washed all the paint out. What you will see some people do is you'll see them block the nozzle at the front like that, pinch it, and then press for air and pull back. And can you see the bubbles in the paint cup? Yeah, you'll see some people do that. And again, opinions divided as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Some people do it, some don't. I'm not a big fan. It's suggested that effectively what you're doing is you're stopping the air from coming out where it would normally come out, and you're forcing it back into the paint cup. And some people argue it doesn't do your seals any good. So, but you will see people do that. So I'll just get rid of all that. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to varnish this fuel tank. It'll be the shiniest. No idea what color it's meant to be, so I'll probably end up having to respray it. Let's have a look. What am I looking for? My varnish. Here it is. So I'm just going to put. Oh, the lid does tend to stick on this. That's it. I'm just going to put a little bit in the color cup. And as always, I'm just going to check my flow. Yeah, so you can see it's coming out quite nicely. So it's no different to painting. I'm just only varnishing. So you can see moving quite quickly because it's very light. I don't want it to run. I'm just using air now. Somebody's giving me feedback. Could you just everybody mute, please? So let's try and dry that bit there. It's not drying so quick today because it's so cold in here. So you can probably see that, John, that it's got quite a shiny surface now. Can you see?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You know, so there's the bit there underneath that I haven't varnished, and then as I turn it around, you can see it start to shine in the light.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've not gone crazy with it. The danger is that you want to try and get it all done really, really quick. It's about just a little bit of patience.
Yeah, I don't have that.
Well, that's maybe something to work on. But you can see that now. It's quite shiny. So for me, I'd be saying that's good enough for me to put a decal on now.
Okay.
Yeah. So, any questions?
There's nothing currently on chat.
No. Okay.
Chris, you said you're going to put something on your blog. Rather than doing that, could you open up a new topic on the forum? That way it's easier for people to post questions on there. And then, yeah, I can post a couple of links as well to YouTube videos that I've followed for, anything extra.
Yeah, okay, no problem at all. I'll do that later today. I'm just trying to make sure this is dry, because if I put it down,
It'll stick to the tissue.
Yeah.
A little dish that I have used this sort of thing comes with, it's GU, I think it's a cheesecake thing. You get two of these little glass dishes in a pack. They're very useful for putting stuff in for cleaning and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a trick that Mick Bonwick uses, but I say with the advantage you get a nice dessert. And
yes.
And it's because it's fairly wide, it's stable when it's on your worktop. You haven't got a chance of knocking it over.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So
I know. Yes, I know.
Product placement again to me.
It does. It does sound like it.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to pop this.
But it's good to reuse things, isn't it? When rather than throwing it away.
Definitely. See, what I'd normally do is I was doing something like that. I would spray the whole thing, and then I'd stick that into a piece of polystyrene foam, and it would just, yeah. Anyway, that's that done.
Does the varnish take longer to set than the paint?
No, it's an acrylic, so it's about the same. Okay. It is quite cold in here. It's warmer under the table because that's where my heater is at the minute. But yeah, but it's, you want to give it a bit of time to dry. You certainly don't want to be sticking decals on it 10 minutes after you've sprayed it. You want to give it a bit of time. If you can leave it overnight before you decal, that's even better, because nice hard flat surface. I'm just going to give this a bit of a clean out. So I've gone with my regular airbrush cleaner because it's an acrylic, so I don't need anything hotter to get it clean. Give it a whiz with the paintbrush. Fire a bit of that. Tip that into there. And you can see this is why I like this particular airbrush, because it's so easy to clean. You have to be a little bit more thorough with when you've been varnishing, because it blows clear right from the get-go. So you've got no way of telling whether or not there's any varnish left in. So I just make sure that I've sent quite a bit of airbrush cleaner through it. There we go. And hopefully that's given you a feel for airbrushing and how you might start if you've not started. Does anybody have any more questions? Because I can't really show you a lot more. I can continue painting.
Some people advocate taking your airbrush completely to bits after you've had a painting session and sort of soaking all the various bits in whatever, thinners or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're sort of implying that what you've done is sufficient for that particular airbrush.
No, not quite, John. Not quite. No, what I'm saying is when I do a paint change, so when I went from that grey paint to the varnish, that's how I would clean it. So at the moment, this airbrush is ready to take some more paint.
Right.
But if I'm not going to be airbrushing this week, or for that matter, probably even tomorrow, then I'll take it to pieces. And what I'll do, in fact, let me do it now. I don't need to turn it off. So I've given it a good clean already, but I'm just going to take the needle out. Can you see, look, there's some muck on the needle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, so even though I was quite diligent with the way that I did it, so this is the damp cloth that I've just taken out. Look how much muck is on the needle.
Oh yeah.
So had I have not done that, that would all be sitting inside my airbrush ready for me next time I started spraying. And I can tell you now, it wouldn't behave very well. It certainly wouldn't like it. So now that I've done that, just going to run a little bit more airbrush cleaner through it. Struggle with getting these things on. There we go. Just turn my fan on again just for a sec while I'm doing this. And now I would call that clean now. And I'd be happy to sort of put that to one side until next time.
Right.
But I would never, I mean, I didn't have to do any sort of full dismantling. There's no need. I just needed to get the needle out and give the needle a wipe.
What about the other part of the nozzle though that the needle goes into? Wasn't that?
Well, yeah, but I've washed that with airbrush cleaner. I mean, if you wanted to go a little bit more OTT, you could probably stick something a little bit hotter, like some thinners through it. If you really wanted to, you could take the nozzle apart, take the nozzle out. You could put it in an ultrasonic cleaner. I've got an ultrasonic cleaner that I sometimes use, you know, but not very often. That's sufficiently clean, and that will be okay. When I come to it next time, it won't be stuck. It'll just work straight off the bat.
Right.
What I always do before I start any airbrushing is I'll just fire a little bit of airbrush cleaner through the airbrush because it's got some lubricant in it. So I just do that as well. What I've also got every now and then is I've got some airbrush super lube, which came with my iWater airbrush, and I'll just wipe a little bit of that down the needle as well. Just helps it slip in and out of the seals inside. So you could do that. But really, there's not a lot more to it. It's fairly basic, and as you can see, I've cleaned it quite thoroughly. Getting a really weird noise. I think it's this extractor, isn't it? Yeah, that's better. So, anything else you'd like me to do to show you? No. Are we all airbrushed out?
Yeah, just got to go and buy one now.
Yeah, you know, you can't. Let me just do a little bit with this sort of entry-level airbrush. I'm just going to have to, because my quick release isn't working, I'll have to just.
Are you expecting to continue with this subject on the next Christian Den, or?
No, I don't think. Not unless anybody specifically says.
I thought you were talking about doing weathering.
Ah, yes, yeah. Weathering isn't just airbrushing. So, yeah, I mean, we can talk about weathering, and the airbrush is a great tool for weathering, but it's not the be all and end all. So, but yeah, I mean, we can probably, if everybody's in agreement, we could probably do a little bit of start on weathering next time.
We need to think about is who's going to win this massive prize.
Yes, Yeah, what I'll do, I'll see if I'd really like John to draw it, because I think, you know, he's sponsoring it. So what I might do is see if he comes back to me in the next couple of days, and if he does,
Okay.
then I'll announce. I'll either announce it or we'll get him to join next time, because he's launched a couple of extra kits. I don't know if you saw it. He's done some new retaining walls and a new station platform kit. So I thought it'd be quite nice if he joined us to talk us through those and then the other new kits that he's got planned for 2021. So shall I do a bit with this entry level airbrush, just to prove that it does actually do the same thing? Or have you seen enough?
Well, personally, I think I've seen enough, but
yeah, well, if
Chris,
nobody,
why would you consider that to be entry level rather than the previous one?
It's basically the quality of the build. This is sort of a Chinese clone type airbrush. The action is not as smooth on it. It's not as well finished, and it won't give such a neat spray pattern. But it does a job. So, and this airbrush is, I don't know, 20, 30 quid. This airbrush here is sort of 200. So, and Pete will attest to this, because I think, Pete, when you came over all that time ago, you were using both airbrushes, and you could tell the feel of this airbrush, this H&S one. You're more in tune with it. It's weird, but that's why I'd call it entry level, because it'll do a good job for you. And it'll only cost you about 30 quid. If you want to invest and you're going to do a lot of airbrushing, then something like this it's worth having. I got this when I was entering scale models in competition, so I wanted the best possible finish I could get, which is why I went for that airbrush.
Yeah, just to confirm that, Chris. Yes, I mean that was really nice, that H&S one. And
yeah.
And I've got I'm probably going to go and get one of those H&S ones when I get to the point of wanting to do a load of airbrushing, because I've got a reasonably high-end Badger one, but the H&S forward back was much more progressive with more control of the paint than the Badger one, and that really felt more controllable. And it's interesting, when you introduced me to H&S, I'd never heard of that brand, and they didn't seem to be big in the model railway market, but I've noticed since they're all over the model railway magazines now, so they obviously decided to push into that market.
Yes, they're very prolific in the scale modeling community, which is where I picked up on it. Yeah, it's just they're just good at the Iwata airbrushes are good airbrushes as well. And these will do a job. You know, if you haven't got an airbrush and you haven't got hundreds of pounds to spend, this will do a job. You will be able to paint with it. So yeah. Any more questions? Don't know whether I ought to. Again, I could talk about painting with metallics. I don't know if anybody's ever done any of this. It's slightly different technique. These are very, very thin, right? So same as these things. These are very, very good paints for scale aircraft modeling. These MRP paints. These are lacquer-based paints, and you can see all the gum in the bottom there. Just give it a bit of a shake up. And these actually come, I don't know if you can hear it, but they've got ball bearings inside. So they come with ball bearings. So when you shake them up, the ball bearings help you. And it just goes to show how much you need to shake them, because as you can see, there's still pigment on the bottom of the jar. And with these, I won't stop shaking them until all that pigment has disappeared. It's nearly all gone. Yeah, pretty much there. And they really are very, very nice paints to paint with. I was going to talk about metallics. So when you're spraying metallics, and I can't think there'll be many instances in model railway where we would be using metallics, but I'm sure there'll be some. The most important thing with a metallic is what you put it on top of. Firstly, they're very, very thin. So you want to be a low air pressure. You don't want it blasting out, otherwise you're just going to end up with a flood on the model. And secondly, you need to prime it with gloss black, and it makes all the difference to the metallic effect. I'm just wondering what I've got. In fact, I haven't got anything that I can.
Can you use that for brass or phosphorus, bronze, or copper?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think
So
I've got.
There is an application for that in locomotives, isn't there? There's a copper chimneys, the Great Western, and
All right.
brass
Yes.
cones and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true. So I've got gold here. There's gold, and bronze. So yeah, you would, but you want to put it on top of a gloss black surface as your base, because what happens is it really makes the metallic effect pop. In fact, what I could probably do, let me go and get a model from the house, because I could just do with a 5-minute break anyway. I'll just go and grab a model and bring it in that's got some metal work on it, so that you can see what effect it does. But the most important thing is put it down really, really lightly, but make sure you put it down on top of a gloss black, and it really makes the color come out. So you okay to excuse me for 5 minutes, because we've only got 20 minutes or so left. I'll come back. I'll come straight back, but I'll just go and grab this model so I can show you it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I've just switched my headset off and didn't know if it'd come back on. Right, so I thought I'd bring this one in just to show you, because this covers a number of things.
Is that airplane called Tigger?
It is. It's a Tiger Meat aircraft. Yeah, there's the sort of I think it's NATO that do it, but they every so many years they have something called a tiger meet, and they basically get all the aircraft and paint them all with tiger stripes and various other bits and pieces. This is actually a German one, but yeah, it's just called Tigger. But the reason why I've brought this one is twofold. And it's very, very clean. Aircraft aren't normally this clean, but obviously they're showbirds, so they're made this clean, or they're kept this clean. But this was just to show you some decaling. I mean, this is I've not airbrushed those tiger stripes on. That they're actually decals, but as you can see, or hopefully you can see, you can't tell that they're decals. They just look like they've been painted on. And let me tell you, that was one pain in the backside putting all those decals on.
Is it the orange bit or the black bit that's the decal? Which is the background and which is the decal?
The decal is the black bit, and the orange is an MRP lacquer paint, and it's got like almost like a metallic-y type of effect to it. So it's but if just wanted to show you the metal on here. So around the back of the aircraft, this is actually aluminium. So you can, it actually looks like it's metal. And these, I think I did this with, what did I do that with? I think I did that with jet exhaust, but again, you can see how metallic it looks. Yeah. So hopefully that gives you a feel for what you can do. The landing gear is quite good as well from a, if I can get the picture right, from a metallic perspective. Gosh, come on. So difficult this when you try to, I must be seeing a reverse image, but again, you can see all the metal on the landing gear, how metallic it actually looks. Don't know if you can see that effect very well on the camera. Yeah, so that was a decaling experience, to say the least. Because it's not one decal, you have to line them all up as well, which makes it quite difficult. And there we go.
Chris, how many hours would you say you've put into that?
I don't know, a long time. The actual build wasn't particularly difficult, but there's probably, getting the gloss finish was the bit that probably took most of my patience, to be honest. And that's probably got 7 or 8 coats of that orange on. But yeah, there's weeks and weeks of work in that. I don't know if you can see inside the cockpit as well. There's all the instrument panel and everything is, and the ejection seat and all that kind of stuff. And there are some rudimentary weathering techniques actually on this aircraft, as clean as it is. There's a bit of dry brushing inside the cockpit, because you would still get this sort of scratching and stuff like that on the ejection seat. But yeah, it's quite a lot of time. Probably a month or 2, I would have thought. I've never really sat down and tracked one. Maybe I ought to. I've got a cupboard full that needs building, so maybe I ought to just sit down and time it and see how long it takes. But yeah, let me just go and get another piece, because I think just across here I've got another bit that I did. Let me just, if I can find it.
It's probably one of those questions that, like, how much did you spend on your model roll, where you don't really want to know the answer?
No, exactly. Yes, I could have done something far more useful with my time.
Well, the answer always will be that you've spent a lot more than you thought you had.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, Cole was doing a bit of work on that. I don't know if you're still with us, Colin, but
yeah, he is.
Oh, here's some. You were saying, because when you started your new layout, you started adding up because you were starting from scratch and it scared you. So I think you stopped calculating, didn't you?
Yeah, well, the baseboard and the track weren't too bad, and then all the Merg kits, they weren't too bad. But you spend £5 here and £5 there on a bit of fencing, and then you've got the people, and then you've got, you spend 30, you spend a £5 on a tub of glue and 16 quid on a set of pens for your card kits. You know, if you add those up, that comes to more than the headline items if you're not careful.
Yes, yeah, it's just a little bit. Oh, it's only a £5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I liked it. Before lockdown, I could go to a show and I wouldn't, I'd spend £5 here and £10 there on the stalls. But of course, now it's on lockdown, you've got to buy it on eBay and it all appears on my bank account. And now I'm in big trouble.
Yeah, it's here's another example of metallic. So these are the exhaust vents for a Harrier jump jet that's on the shelf of doom at the moment. And remember me saying about when you airbrush things, any slight imperfection will appear. I don't know if you can see it on there, but can you see that there? Can you see that tiny little seam at the top?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent, I could spend some time with you showing you how I would deal with that, but I spent a long time putting these together and I still ended up with a tiny little seam. I don't know why I brought this over. That was just an example, a bit of an example of some weathering on an undercarriage leg that I'd done. But yeah, and what I'm going to do over the next couple of weeks before the February event is I'm going to make a model, a fueling depot. It's a Nightwing one. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like with the fuel tanks and all that kind of stuff. So I'll make one of those, and then when we start talking about weathering, and the like, I can show you how I would apply it to a model railway subject as opposed to an aircraft or a tank or whatever. Has that been of any use to you all? I'm conscious that I've been talking at you for nearly 3 hours.
I found it all really fascinating. Yeah, really great.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and I really appreciate everybody attending. We've got 20 people on, so
I think the recording will be very valuable when I come back to actually trying to do it and saying, what was it Chris said?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognise that you do your own thing, and under no circumstances am I prescribing how you should do this. It's really just about sharing my experience and helping you to avoid any pitfalls. You can't really go far wrong. Don't put any thick paint in your airbrush. Make sure if you're going to mix in the colour cup that you put the thinner in first. And yeah, there's nothing that can't be recovered from.
I think, Chris, it's very valuable because I think what we all do probably is that we pick up bits of information from a number of sources, and then we make up our own way of doing things.
Yep.
That works for us, and we only perhaps seek advice when it all goes tits up.
Well, I think that's one of the things, and that's a relevant point, because now that we've done this, we're not going to stop talking about airbrushing. So what I'd like you to do is, if you get some practice in, and then come back with the challenges that you've had, and the same with decaling, because I can show you the ideal way of doing it, and even with the ideal way of doing it, you get challenges. The things just go wrong. So it's how does one recover when you've put a decal down and then you've decided to put some microset on it and it's just dissolved, it's gone, it's just exploded. And they can shatter. Some of the really old decals, when you start putting these quite aggressive substances on them, they can just shatter. So yeah, but we'll cover that. So practice, and you'll find that if you do those kind of exercises on a bit of paper, by the time you've done that for about an hour, 45 minutes or something like that a couple of times, then you'll start to find that you've got a feel for where the trigger is, what amount of paint you're going to get. You play around with your pressures to turn them up, turn them down. You saw what a mess it created when I had the pressure too low. So stick it around anything above 15 for as a starting point. You can always turn it down. But if, I had to take the needle out and clean the needle in order to get my airbrush working again after I tried to do it at about 6 PSI. So yeah, there we go.
One question, Chris, if I could.
Yeah, just speak.
You were talking about the acrylic versus enamel, and I think the impression is probably that acrylic is a preferable choice where possible, for various reasons. However, of course, with railway modelling, you've got Phoenix Precision Paints and the likes of Rail Match, and they do most of their specific company colours, you know, whether it's a GWR chocolate and cream and all that sort of stuff, tend to be enamel, therefore you might be forced to go down that route. Now, I may have missed it, and apologies if I did. Did you mention at all, if you're doing two colours and you want to do acrylic and enamel, if there are any issues with using one over the top of the other and vice versa?
You do have to be careful. I would describe, and I think sort of the scale modelers would describe the substances in terms of temperatures. So an acrylic is quite a cool quite a cool product. Enamel is quite warm, and lacquer is hot. So if you start spraying lacquers over the top of acrylics, it can lift the acrylic. If you've got the lacquer down and you put the acrylic over the top of it, once the lacquer is cured, then the acrylic will be fine sitting on top of the lacquer. So you do have to be careful where you mix and match. If I was going to mix acrylics and enamels on the same model, I would put the enamels down first if I could, because it's the hotter of the two substances and it's likely to lift any acrylic if you overdo it.
And that would tend to override the normal thing where you'd put the lighter color on first, would it?
Well, it's the temperature of the it's nothing to do with the color. It's like almost like the temperature of the base substance. So if you think as lacquer being really, really hot, like cellulose type horrible nasty stuff, enamel being sort of middle of the road, and then acrylic being almost benign, really, you know, you can put it on top of anything. It's fairly good.
You are using temperature in terms of degrees centigrade.
Yeah, well, in terms of strength,
in degrees of color density.
No, nothing to do with the color. No, it's
the aggressiveness of the solvent, isn't it?
It is exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yes.
Well, yeah. I would say it's analogous to using different temperature solders when you're putting a complex thing together.
Yeah.
You don't want putting the last piece of detail on to melt the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you build it all with 70-degree solder, and then try and finish the last bit with 140-degree solder, and the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, or rather, you don't do it that way.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do it that way, of course. But yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Would you mind putting
Thanks,
that
Chris.
on?
That's fashion.
You're gonna send us the recipe for the thinners.
Yeah.
Could you add that to it? Actually, because that'd be quite useful to know what solvent strengths, you know, what order we should use them.
Yes, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can lay down an enamel over an acrylic if you do it carefully. If you do it very, very lightly and let it dry, if you flood it, it's going to lift the acrylic off. So you do need to and lacquer. Well, that you know, if you wanted to get the acrylic actually off the model, then using some kind of lacquer thinner, it would just lift it off. So yes, I will put that on the forum for you.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, any other questions?
Talking of scale scenes,
yeah.
You mentioned last time that you were looking at laser cutting some other models.
Yes.
And I'm not sure you talked about the terraced houses, but there's also some cottages as well, which are quite nice.
Yes.
I also thought with this new announcement he's got of the platforms.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that looks like, but whether that would be quite useful to have laser cut, because the sides you could have, you know, a nice constant flat line.
Yeah, you could, absolutely.
Whereas hand cutting it, you could end up with a bit of a mess.
Yeah, where I'm at with that, I've just finished. I haven't done the terraced house as a kit yet, although I've built the terraced houses, and you can probably see them behind me actually. Oh, you can't. They're behind the wall. I've built the terraced houses, and so I've got all the laser cut parts for that, but I haven't tried to make it into a kit yet because it's going to be quite complicated. I don't know if anybody's built one of the. I think Gary's built them, but there's a lot of parts in that particular model. So that will become a laser cut kit at some point. What I have finished though is I did some low relief arches, because they're the sort of thing, they've got a nice curved arch, and yeah, it's quite tedious making sure that you get the curve perfect, because the laser cutter does it perfect every time. So I'll probably have that one up on the website within the week. I just need to do a test cut.
Wasn't that's the new? Is he got some new arches, doesn't he?
He has got some new arches, and I haven't bought that kit yet. So that's one of the things that I'll probably be doing in the next couple of weeks, is I'll buy that kit and then prepare that as a laser cut as well. Because
Chris, that's the one.
Sorry, Colin, I can't see you. Just one second. Let me just unpin myself.
It matches the tunnel mouth, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So yes, so my plan is to do I've got low relief arches, I've got the viaduct arches on the radar, and then the two new ones that he's just announced, I think would again be quite beneficial, because it's the sort of thing that you build en masse. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Retaining walls, yeah.
Yeah, and retaining walls as well. So yes, yeah.
Chris,
So I'm gonna do all of those.
The thing is, with the retaining walls and some of the arches and what have you, they are listed as variable height.
Okay, I'll have to look at that. Certainly, the ones that I built on the old layout, they were. I don't remember them being remember those being a variable, but I'll have to have a look. It's a long time since I've looked at them.
It's like the tunnel entrances. You can, depending on what railroad you're in, whether they're circular or straight up on the sides and curved, there's about 7 or 8 different shapes you can choose.
Yeah, so I think what I'd have to do with those is I'd have to make them available, so you can just select whichever one you want.
Yeah.
Because it's only one extra drawing, so it's not particularly difficult to change. Yeah, because there's some tunnel mouths that kind of aren't vertical at the sides; they kind of keep coming round, don't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just haven't. The retaining arches was pretty straightforward. So yeah, not thought about the heights though. I have to have a think about that. But yeah. Any other questions? Anything else scale scenes related?
There's nothing on track currently.
No, just for the benefit of the guys that are new to us today, what we were talking about at the top of the call was we did John Whiffen of Scale Scenes does the free a free download of a little coal office, and so what we did is I put a laser cut kit together of the little coal office, and then everybody's built one, or most of the people on the call built one, and John's sponsored us. He's going to pick a name at random, and he's going to give a £10 voucher to the winner of the competition. So, has anybody got any of the models to hand that they've done? Yeah, do you want to show us then, John?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I've got one as well.
That's the island platform building.
Yeah, I was meaning it looks good. Is that the new one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the?
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, looks good, that. So yeah, what we're going to do, I'll probably do
his baby brother.
What we'll do is, I think we might have to do another group build in the summer. I don't know. Get your thinking caps on whether we do, maybe I don't know, maybe a parkside kit. If you want a challenge, then we could probably all do a parkside kit of our choice. See if I can get somebody to sponsor us, or I'll sponsor it or something. Just for a bit of.
That's a small LED on the PCB that we've had made in China inside.
Right.
So
yeah. Yeah, I noticed it was lit up on your photographs, John. Looked really good. Really good. So yeah, that's what we've been doing over the last. I think. What do we do? Do we spend a month on it? I think it was all, wasn't it? But we're going to do another one, but it'll probably be a plastic kit, so that we can then do the plastic kit and then practice our airbrushing and weathering if anybody fancies a group build on that. And I could also do a session actually on building plastic kits. That might be useful. if anybody's interested. And that, gentlemen, is it.
Okay.
Unless anybody's got any other questions that they really can't keep inside.
Thanks, Chris. I've really enjoyed this session. I missed the beginning, but I'll get the rest of it on the video.
On the recording.
I like the idea of a look at how you cope with putting plastic kits together, because I think you've got
okay, we can do that.
We could probably all pick up something from it. I've not built a plastic kit for years, so I'd quite like to see something like that at some point.
Yeah, well, I might do the Nightwing kit. That fuel, because that'll have seams all in it, and I can show you one of the biggest challenges that plastic modelers have is how to deal with seams on models. So I can maybe we do that in February.
That'd be good. Yeah,
and
I've actually got some Nightwing tucked away somewhere in one of the
have you?
one of the boxes under the
yeah.
unit.
Is that a kit of, Chris, the Nightwing one?
I think it's a fuel depot, Pete.
Oh, okay.
You know, with the tanks and everything.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Because it'll make a good subject for gluing together, and I can talk you through how I would approach some of that. But it'll also have seams in it. So and you know, we need to know. I mean, this is a good example of a seam. When you buy, which camera am I on? Let me just put my other camera. Let me just put my. So you should see my desktop now.
Yeah.
Let me just find myself so that I can see what I'm actually showing you. There'll be a second. Right, that one.
I think that idea of the plastic kit is a good idea.
Yeah.
You could actually take it right the way through. Maybe decals, maybe as well, and weathering.
Definitely.
Then pipe work would have sort of metallic paint, wouldn't it, and stuff like that.
Definitely, yeah. And there'll be all oil and stains and grease marks and all kinds of things that we can play around with. So this canopy on this aircraft, when it came, had a seam down the middle. So it just goes to show what you can actually do. Even on clear plastic, you can get rid of the seams. Can you? I'm going to say, can you see that? But you can't see it because I've got rid of it. And similarly, along the back of the aircraft here, there's a seam where you've glued the two parts together. Again, I can show you how you would approach that. So when you glue it, you make it as easy as possible for you to actually get rid of the seam. So yeah, we'll I'll have a look at the Nightwing kit, and then I'll probably do that on the next one, which will be the first Saturday of February, whatever date that's going to be.
So you'll let us know where best to source it from and so on in that time.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, plastic kit construction is very much plastic kit construction. So I'd suggest that if you want to build along, then I don't know where I got the Nightwing kit from, to be honest, Pete. I got it from a show. But pretty much anything. The Parkside kits are quite hard. They're not. You can put them, you throw them together, but they're not very well molded. So they're quite challenging if you really want to get a first class finish on them. The quality of the injection moldings isn't particularly good. There's lots of flash and stuff like that on them. So if you're new to plastic modeling, probably trying to avoid something like that to start with, and go for something, you know, a plastic house or a hut or something a little bit simpler to start with.
So the 30th of January is the East Midlands area group.
Yeah.
The next date is the 6th of February.
6th of February, will it be? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll be dropping you all a note probably a week before, just to remind you all. What I'm going to do is I'll publish the dates for all the Modellers Medleys on the forum on my website, so you'll be able to see in there. But I'll send you a note about a week before to remind you, and then I'll send the invite out on the Friday night like I usually do, and we'll glue some stuff together if everybody's in agreement with that.
Yeah.
And any other questions before we close the call down?
Also, it'd be nice to build along the actual thing you're doing, because then what you're showing is directly relevant rather than having to interpret it for a different kit. So.
Let me get it, Pete. Just 1 second. Let me get it. It's in here somewhere. Let's have a look. is. I've got a bright yellow track cleaning wagon here, Pete, that needs finishing. You don't know anybody who...
I'm gonna have to when we're allowed, I'll have to come and see you and we can have a session on that.
Yeah. So this is the kit that I'm proposing to do. Oh, what's that one? Oh, I picked it up. That one's a porter cabin. So this is a Nightwing PM116 diesel fuel oil depot.
$26.95 from Model Scenery Supplies.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just on the Nightwing site and I can't find it at the moment. But
Is it N gauge?
No, it's this one's 00, but you can do an N gauge one.
do they do it in both?
I don't know. But what you do is probably make it and then put it in the oven and shrink it a bit. Put it on a hot wash, put it on a boil wash or something. But yeah, I think it'd be quite interesting to have a look. There isn't going to be a lot of seams to play around with, to be honest, the way they've done the kit. But yeah, and I'll just show you some of the techniques I use, and yeah, we'll do that next time if that's all right with everybody.
Yes.
That's it then, guys, for this session. Thanks ever so much for your time this morning. Hope you've enjoyed it. And
Very good.
Thank you, Chris.
Really good.
yeah,
Yeah,
a pleasure.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year. See
One
you
quick
all.
question before you go.
Oh, hang on, we got a question. Yeah.
It's just for me as a newbie. Where will I find the video for this? Because my memory is terrible and I'll need to go through it again.
It'll be on the website. There'll be if you go to the website.
Your website, yeah.
My website, yeah. There'll be a link in the forum to it when I've rendered it, and I'll post it up on YouTube, and then I'll link it to the forum.
Brilliant, thanks.
Is that okay?
Did you see the chat message I sent just to you, Chris?
Just 1 second. No, I can see the one saying, do you want to record it?
No, it's later than that. Let me just see. Oh, you spotted it, obviously.
Do you know what? When yeah, we shouldn't share. We can't really share this. But no. when I was looking at it, I was thinking that's an unusual shape, isn't it? I think, guys, you can read into what that comment might have been. Okay, but I assure you,
this phone call. So thanks, Chris. See
ya.
ya.
No problem. I assure you, it's actually a fuel tank, an external fuel tank. Happy New Year, everybody. I'll see you all in February.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Cheers then.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.